Somebody sent me a story about a haunted doll, and I genuinely wish that they hadn't. The person that sent me this story wants to stay anonymous, but for the purpose of the story, we're going to call her Katie. Now, Katie received a life-size doll from her grandfather. Already, I don't like the size of a life-size doll. She knows that this doll is an antique and it's quite important to the family. Her family emigrated from Persia and they couldn't bring that many belongings over with them except this doll. It was pretty important and it came with them. Like I said, it's life size. Katie sent me a picture. She's 5'5". This doll must be what, 5'3", 5'2"? Terrifying. Katie knows that this doll has been in the family for quite a while, as it's currently wearing her great-grandmother's wedding dress. Now, I don't know if there's any history or any meaning around a life-size doll wearing a wedding dress, and Katie doesn't really know much about the history of it either. She just knows that it's quite important. Anyway, her granddad had gifted her this doll and she didn't really want it, though she didn't really want to say that to anybody. So she kept it in her room and immediately she just had weird vibes around this doll. At first, she noticed little things going missing around her and they would always appear right next to the doll. These things were like an earring, her makeup, like little kind of trinkety things that she'd lose, search everywhere for, and then find it right next to the doll. She'd also wake up between midnight and 3 a.m. most evenings and feel like she's being watched. That's when she got the sense that she needed to move this doll kind of away from her bedroom. She didn't really have anywhere in the house to put it, so she just turned it facing the wall. That's when some more things started to happen in her bedroom. She noticed that her bedroom door would be open even when she closed it, and when she left it open it would be closed. It wouldn't just happen when she wasn't in the house, it would happen overnight. She just noticed that her door was slightly open and sometimes the door wasn't facing the wall anymore. This really freaked Katie out, as it would freak anybody out. I mean, imagine waking up and having a life-size doll staring at you. No thank you, Grandad. Thank you for the sentiment, but I don't want this doll. Katie confided in her family and nobody really cared to listen except a couple of aunties. They didn't really say much about it. They just gave each other some weird looks when Katie started talking about this haunted doll, which makes me think, do the aunties know something about it? And then some of her cousins would kind of tease her about this haunted doll. She started to get a little bit paranoid that this doll was in fact haunted or something was associated with this doll, and that's when she started telling her friends. And she remembers being on FaceTime with one of her friends, told about the doll like stealing small items and opening and closing the door, and how the doll wouldn't be facing the wall anymore. And her friend also said, "What, do your lights flicker as well?" joking that she lives in a haunted house with a haunted doll. And at that moment her dressing table lights started flickering. Obviously this freaked Katie the fuck out, and she didn't care about this doll being sentimental anymore. She took it straight down to the basement, and that's where it stayed. Katie said that there's been no more happenings going on in her bedroom since the doll has been evicted. But she's emailed me this story kind of asking for help, saying, do you know? I don't know what it is, but do any of you guys know what could be the issue here? Is it associated with the great-grandmother? Is Katie being a bit paranoid? What do you think it is? If you've got a creepy story that you want me to talk about, make sure you DM me on here, on the other app, or you can find my email in my bio. Is this a haunted doll? What do you think?
I got an email from a girl who said that she had a horrible spirit attach itself to her after she had a seance with her friends when she was younger. So we're going to call this girl Kelly for the story. And this happened to Kelly when she was in middle school. So when she was in middle school, she had this friend and we're going to call her Kiki. So Kiki invites Kelly over for a sleepover one night. And Kelly is very comfortable staying there because Kiki's mom is a sheriff. One thing she didn't know until she was dropped off though was that Kiki's mom was actually at work that night. And so they were home alone. Kelly said that she was a bit of a goody two-shoes when she was younger and that there were other girls at this sleepover. And all these other girls wanted to do were play games like 7 Minutes in Heaven, various drinking games, and egging their neighbor's house. And she was not down for this at all because she was a good girl. But they do this anyway, and they do it till about 3 a.m. Well, 3 a.m. rolls around and Kiki pulls out this witchcraft book and she starts telling scary stories. But they weren't just telling scary stories. They also decided that they wanted to play this game. And part of this game was you would take a camera and you would take a picture of the mirror with the flash on and you would see what would come through on the picture. This was after using the witchcraft book. Kelly said that it was very strange because they were taking these pictures and then they would look at the picture and and various faces and orbs were showing up on the pictures. And no, she said she does not have these pictures. This was a while ago. Well, in order to play this game, they had to turn the lights off. And so while the lights were off, before they were taking the pictures, Kelly said that she felt this pressure on her shoulders. So they go to take one of the pictures, and then it comes out, and she looks at it, and it is this old woman. Kelly's sitting on a bunk bed, right? And so right above her on the top bunk is an old woman hanging off the bunk bed with her bony hands on Kelly's shoulders. Now, these girls are just having the time of their lives with this. They think it's the most interesting thing ever because they didn't stop doing it. They continued to play these games. Even though Kelly was scared because Kelly was a Christian, they end up moving into the living room because they want to do a seance. Now, Kelly said that she wasn't stupid enough to participate in the seance, but that she did sit in the protection circle. So they start doing whatever they're doing with the seance or whatever, and Kiki decides that she's going to take another picture. There's a mirror in the living room, I guess, like towards the hallway, and they can see themselves in this mirror. So Kiki takes the picture. They then look at it, and they can clearly see that there's an orange orb sitting on Kelly's lap. At this point, Kelly has had enough. She's like, okay, I can't do this anymore. This is scaring me. I'm calling my mom and going home. So she calls her mom. Her mom doesn't ask any questions. She just comes and picks her up, and she goes home. Now, this is where things start to get scary. So fast forward a couple weeks later, and Kelly starts having these really scary sleep paralysis incidents, and she starts hearing things at night. She also started seeing things whenever it was dark, to the point where she couldn't even get out of bed without a flashlight. Kelly did try to tell her parents about this, but her parents just basically told her, like, you're imagining this. This isn't real. Stop watching scary movies. Well, at some point, Kelly is like, enough is enough. She decides that she needs evidence, and she is going to go talk to the church pastor, whether her parents are there or will come with her or not. But in order to do this, she wants to bring evidence to this pastor. So she decides that she's going to do the same thing that her friend Kiki did, and she is going to do whatever they did before they started taking the pictures, and then take the picture in the mirror with the lights off and the flash on. She said that this was 2012, so she had to use her dad's digital camera, and she said what she saw when she took this picture chilled her to the bone. The same exact woman that she saw at her friend's house is standing behind her, except for this time she looks 7 feet tall. She's wearing this tattered black cloak and has long, thin, stringy black hair. She said that her smile was unnaturally wide and that her head was cocked to the side, like way too far to the side. She said she looked like a predator. So Kelly freaks out. She runs and turns on the light, and then she just runs to her bed and jumps underneath the covers until her alarm goes off for the next morning for school. She ends up telling her parents about this again, and they're still like, you need to stop watching scary movies. This is not real. And so at this point, she's like, whatever, I'm going to the pastor and I'm going to tell him. So she goes to the pastor and she shows the pastor the picture, and he clearly sees that there's something negative, very wrong, standing behind her. He called it, he starts with a D and rhymes with Lehman. So after the pastor sees this, he actually comes to her house and he tells her parents, listen, she's not lying. I saw this. This was standing behind her. There's something very evil in your house. We have to pray over your house immediately. And that's what he does. And she said that this was a huge mistake. As soon as the pastor starts praying over her house, that she audibly starts hearing this loud screeching sound. It was so loud that she had to cover her ears. And she felt crazy at the time because she said that her pastor and her parents could not hear this. It was only her that could hear it. But she did say that she didn't have bad dreams anymore, and she didn't see the shadows, so she assumed at the time that this thing was gone. She was wrong. A few months later, she goes to her friend's house. Now, her friend is older than her. We're going to call her Mary. At the time, her friend was 14 years old. Kelly had just turned 12 years old. Now, Kelly's mom did not like this friend very much. Apparently, she had some behavioral issues, but nonetheless, her mother lets her hang out with her. So she goes over to her house, and the reason why she's going over to her house, actually, is because her friend Mary was a Christian, and apparently, over the past couple of weeks, Mary had been having these horrible nightmares, and she wanted somebody there to sleep with her. Well, while Kelly is there, Mary tells Kelly that her grandmother, who had apparently been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, had been seeing a woman all over their house. So Kelly tells her, well, I actually know how to catch spirits on camera. Like, if your grandmother may be hallucinating, but if she's not and there's something here, we can catch it on camera. And there's a mirror hanging on Mary's door. So they grab the camera, they turn off the lights, they do the thing, they take the picture. As soon as they look at the picture, staring down at Kelly, that's how tall this thing was that woman. But this time, she was not smiling. She said that she had the most evil look on her face, just filled with hatred. So they, of course, start freaking out. And at the time, they decide that the best course of action is to pull out Mary's Bible and start reading from Psalms. And she says she doesn't really know why she picked that, but it felt right at the time to her. So as they're reading from the Bible, all of a sudden, Mary just screams out in pain. And Kelly is like, what is wrong with you? And she's like, my shoulder's on fire. So Kelly goes over to her and she lifts up her shirt to look at her shoulder, and she said that there was a huge bruise on her shoulder of like a handprint right on Mary's shoulder. At this point, they think that reading the Bible is making this worse. So they decide that they're going to stop reading the Bible. And she said that after they stopped reading the Bible, that it did stop for a second. So they thought that they were safe until they went to bed. She said that she was lying on a futon near her window, near Mary's window, and all of a sudden she hears this like sounds like nails just scratching against the drywall. And she said that it sounded like it was literally circling the whole room. But she said that whatever was doing this, it was going as slow as it possibly could. She said that neither of them were brave enough to get up, and that they literally just laid there in the dark and listened to this thing slowly stalk the room in circles. And then it started going up the wall and then to the ceiling in a spiral. And then as soon as it got to the ceiling, it just stopped. And she said as soon as it stopped, she jumps out of bed and she runs over to the light, and she turned on the light as fast as she could. She said that after she turned on the lights, there was nothing there except for fingerprints on the wall that, in her words, looked the size of a Publix platter, which if you guys don't know what a Publix platter is, Publix is a grocery store in Florida, and a Publix platter would be like a huge platter. She said that they decided to go to the living room after that. Now, she did say that she didn't ever go to this girl's house ever again, but she is pretty sure that the mother of the house, like Mary's mother, did call a pastor to come bless the home. She said that after this, she never saw the woman again, but that she still, to this day, has nightmares about it. And this is, 14 years later at this point, and she still cannot stand the sound of fingernails against a drywall. So what did you guys think of this story? So creepy. What do you guys think it was? Sorry, I couldn't say the D word. I noticed that my account is getting strikes on it again, and I can't have that happen again, so I have to be careful with my wording. Not as careful as I was being before. That was too careful. That was ridiculous. But I just can't say certain words, so I'm just going to avoid them for a little bit. But do you guys think that that's what it was the D word, or do you think that it was just a negative spirit? And the witchcraft thing, do you think that's what brought this all up? Because it sounds to me like that's what brought this up. I would like to know what that was, if they did like a spell or something before they took the pictures, or what exactly it was that they did before they took the pictures. This is why you don't do seances, you guys. But drop all your thoughts, opinions, and suggestions in the comments.
Snacks in hand, the vibe is set, and once I start, you won't forget. Don't eat too much, cause you gotta stay fine. But come on, bestie, it's yeah. So I said the whole thing this time because somebody in the comments are like, some people in the comments are new and they wanted to know the entire song so that they could sing it along. Sorry about the echo, you know, new crib. Okay, so first and foremost, I'm having another sale on the ebook. I know I said I wasn't gonna have one for a long time, but I'm so easy for y'all. Lots of people missed the last one and they were literally writing me asking. So yes, this Friday, same time from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. The book, well, I can't do it $10 like last time, but I can do 15. So it'll be for $15. 15 American dollars. So please make sure you don't miss it this time. Anyway, on to the story. So for the sake of the story, let's call this guy Luke. So this is something that actually happened last year to Luke. Luke is married with 2 kids, right? One newborn, well, at the time she was a newborn, and an older son. Nothing bad, like his marriage is fine, he's happy, you know, his kids are happy, he works, everything is like normal in his life, right? Until one night, he went to sleep like normal, you know, put his kids to bed, he goes to sleep, and he has this dream. He has a dream that as he's sleeping, he wakes up and the house is on fire. And so the first thing he did was wake up his wife like, hey, the house is on fire. And so he looks at the time and the clock says 3:05 exactly. And so immediately they run to the kids' room to, you know, get the kids out. But unfortunately, by the time they tried to get to the kids' room, they couldn't even get out like their front door. I mean like the room door. Because that fire had gotten that bad, and so they were trapped and basically they were about to. And so he wakes up. He wakes up, very traumatic dream, of course. So he wakes up in sweats, he's freaking out, and he like wakes up and he looks at the time and it's 3:05. And so immediately that shook him. So he started praying over the dream. Cool. 2 weeks goes past, everything is normal. Until he goes to sleep and has the same dream again. He wakes up, there's a fire, he looks at the time, except this time it's 3 a.m. exactly, not 3:05. He wakes up his wife, but he didn't spend as much time he did waking up his wife like last dream. Obviously, he didn't take forever to wake her up, but it was on some shit like, wake up, run. He runs to the newborn's room. He was able to get the newborn out. However, before he got to his son's room, the room was already like all on fire. And again, all the exits were already all on fire, so they couldn't escape. And then again, he woke up. And again, he looked at the time, and it's 3 o'clock exactly, just like the dream. And so he's like freaking out. Like, this is shaking him to his core. And so, of course, he prayed over the dream again, except this time he went to his pastor, and he's telling his pastor, like, yo, this is the second time I had this dream, and it's just so funny how the same time I see in the dream is the same time I be waking up. And the pastor told him, like, for sure, like, pay attention to that dream because I feel like God is trying to tell you something. And then, prayed over him. He brought his whole family. They prayed over the entire family. Cool. About a month goes past, and he's starting to feel a little at ease, right? Until he has the dream again. And this time, when he woke up in the dream, the time was 2:52 exactly. This time, he didn't even tap his wife. He screamed so her ass could wake up. He ran to the newborn's room, got the newborn, ran to his son's room, got the son. The wife was already behind him at that point, and so they're heading downstairs to try to leave the house. However, unfortunately, the stairs were already on fire, so they could not make it down there. The only other option is a window, but the window's pretty high, so either way, they're fucked. And he wakes up again, and guess what time was on the clock when he wake up? 2:52 a.m. And at that point, as a man, he said, honestly, he just had to drop down to his knees and start boo-hoo crying, praying to God about it. Because at this point, he's like, bro, I don't want to lose my family. Like, I don't, like, what is this? And he's thinking, he's like, this has to be spiritual. This has to be some kind of a spiritual attack, whether it's from somebody or something. And, of course, Luke follows me on TikTok. And so he spoke to his pastor, of course, but he went to my TikTok because at this point, he's like, this is the only person I know that could help me when it comes to dreams. And so he did send me a message at the time. However, unfortunately, a lot of you guys send me messages asking me like for help and what to do in the messages. However, I don't reply, and it's to protect myself. Like for legal reasons, I don't reply and give like, I'll give advice in videos, but as far as like one-on-one, I don't do that. Although I really be wanting to, I really do. But for legal reasons, And when I was reading his submission, I did see like the messages where he was like asking me for help because he was literally like hopeless. Anyway, so he's on my page and he's watching all of my videos that are like dream related. And I had made this video years ago about what my grandma taught me about dreams. And then I said, if you keep waking up at a specific time of the night, it is for a reason. That's what my grandma told me. And so he's sitting there like scrolling on my TikTok and he's like, yo, what do I do? He sent me the message. Obviously, I didn't reply. And so something told him to just put an alarm on his phone for 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. going forward. And so from there, every night, his alarm would ring at 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. And every time his alarm would ring, he would literally wake up, check the house, check everything, and go back to sleep. So about another 3 weeks go past. Although it's only like 3 weeks, he didn't care. He's still waking up every single night at 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. And so boom, 3 weeks later, his alarm goes off at 2 a.m. And so he wakes up like he usually do. He checks on the kids. He goes downstairs. He's checked all the electrical, the oven, everything. Everything's fine. Cool. He goes back to sleep. His alarm rings again at 2:30 a.m. And so he gets up at 2:30 a.m. Except this time, there's this feeling. He has this feeling. He don't know what the feeling is, but he has it. And he's immediately like, oh, nah. And so he wakes up his wife. And they go check the house together. And upon going downstairs, they realize there's somebody in their backyard. The person is dressed in all black and they're moving around. So immediately he goes through his room. He grabs his strap. And of course, as a man, he's protecting his family. He goes to the backyard to figure out who the fuck that is. Now, a little backstory, right? The wife has this coworker at work that just like harasses her for no reason. And it's like an older lady, not too old, but definitely older than the wife, right? And his wife would always come home complaining about that lady tries to make her life so hard at work, but nobody pays attention to her because everyone knows she's a hater. And so every time she would try something to attack her, it never worked. And it would make her even more mad. And obviously it was like a joke to the wife. She didn't really, she ain't really worried about that lady. But she should have. Because that lady was in that backyard with gasoline and a match in her hand. Not only did she have a match in her hand after, the husband stopped her and everything, called the police. When he went where she was standing, he realized there's a hole in their backyard, like in their grass. And so he puts on some gloves and he goes to look at like the hole, and it's a whole voodoo doll of his wife being buried in his backyard. Thank God he found it like same night, because even though she would have gotten arrested, shit could have still hit the fan for them if that thing stayed in the backyard. So she did end up getting arrested, and he did end up getting rid of that stuff. He brought the pastor over, the pastor anointed, prayed over the house and everything like that. And so from now on, this is my message to Luke. I'm so sorry I didn't reply, but I just explained why. But I do need you to know that you are heavily protected. God literally gave you a warning months prior, and he made sure to do, like, one thing about God, when he speaks to you, he knows how you are and he knows how you think. And so he's going to speak to you in a way that you understand. And it works because eventually you set that alarm, didn't you? Oh shoot, I forgot to tell y'all, lady got arrested and everything. They're fine. They're perfectly fine. Thank God. The lady recently got convicted. That's why he's finally telling me the story. And so I'm really happy for you, Luke. Again, sorry. But I will say, had you gotten my book, you would have been fine. It's like, nah, let me stop. Because you were fine regardless. Like I said, you're heavily protected. And so going forward in life, acknowledge that you're heavily protected. Because if you think about it, the attack was really on your wife, but you are the man of the house and you're the one that had the dream and you are the one that were warned. That tells me you're an amazing husband and God trusted you enough as the leader of the house for you to take care of it. So yeah, that's the story, y'all. Don't forget, sale Friday, 12 to 3 Eastern time, $15 on the ebook. Also, I made a different page for my music so that I don't overwhelm you guys. So if you guys want to support my music, I'm going to tag the page below. Okay, I love you. Bye.
Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. I think it's safe to say that this is my favorite necklace. If you like it, it's down here. Now onto the story. I think I have a story that might interest you. I hope so. When I was 16, my family stayed several days on a ranch in eastern Washington to help with branding, doctoring, and sorting the cattle. The family that we were helping had been friends of my family for some time and were an elderly couple at that point. They had asked my stepdad to help for many years before we went as an entire family. The elderly couple made it a habit to invite many families from the area to help, as it was a big task, and would serve dinner every night around a fire. Ooh, that sounds like a movie. One of the very first days that I was there, we had spent most of the day working to gather the pairs of cows and their calves. My usually sweet-tempered mare was acting horribly. I had had her for several years since she was just a baby, and I never had her act this way before, and never since. I didn't think anything of it. She hadn't up to this point done any ranch work like this, and I wrote it off as young horse jitters and carried on with my day. The first few days were uneventful, far from every day my mare acting as awfully as she had that first day. The only thing that had made me wary thus far was the slight whistling that could be heard every night. Whistling, you say? At night? Keep in mind that a set of train tracks cut clean through the middle of the ranch. There were pastures on either side, and the main houses were situated very close to the tracks. I assumed that the whistling had something to do with the trains, and didn't think much of it. I think that's the problem here. We're not thinking much of anything when there's signs. On the fourth day of gathering cows and their calves, we had stumbled upon a calf that likely wouldn't live much longer. He had been abandoned for whatever reason nature deemed necessary and was freezing cold in a rather cold spring. That is so sad. His gums were pale and he couldn't stand. We all knew that he likely wouldn't make it, but he was rushed towards the main barn and they attempted to nurse him back to health. And honestly, it was surprising that he had survived that long at all. That day, a group of local kids from the nearby school's FFA program had come to the ranch with their agricultural education teacher, who was also a neighbor of the owners of the ranch. These kids were helping with the doctoring and using the experience for some kind of supervised agricultural experience. There were also some other neighboring families that had brought their teenagers to help out. It was by far the busiest day of the visit and the biggest dinner that was served. After I had eaten, I had made my way up to the main house to take a shower. The main house had been there since the 1800s, and I was told that they were currently remodeling it. The only things that worked in the house were the water in one bathroom and the lights in the bathroom and the kitchen. Cell service is rough in this area, and the main house is the first time that I'd been able to charge my phone for most of the trip. As I'm waiting for the hot water to warm up, I'm texting my friends and really not paying much attention at all. At this point, I can't say that I'm surprised that we're not paying attention at all. The sun has fully set, and I could still hear the chatter from the fire down below. I get in the shower and I'm washing my hair. Not long after, I hear the whistling again.
I have the small window beside the shower propped open to let the steam from the bathroom out, and I realize that the conversation of the fire has gone silent, and it must have gotten fairly late. The whistling is louder than it had been in the previous nights, and I come to terms with the fact that there is no way that the whistling has anything to do with the train tracks at all. Yeah, we were waiting on that realization. It's high-pitched, not from a physical whistle, but rather like a bird or somebody whistling with their mouth. And it's louder still. I remember hearing somewhere that if you acknowledge the whistling, you invite the spirit into your life. And at this point in my life, I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits at all. The whistling never really goes away, and I keep showering as if nothing is happening. A couple minutes go by and I turn the water off, and I'm towelling off when the whistling fades and gives way to what sounds like a baby crying. Oh no. There are plenty animals nearby, and that sound scared me much less than the whistling. Really? I assumed that it was a calf with a weird sounding call and ignored it. Or, hear me out, like a mountain lion or something, if not something paranormal. Yeah. I'm scrolling Instagram as I wait for the steam to leave the mirror, and I can hear creaking in the house. I know that nobody else is there, and the creaking sounds so similar to footsteps that my heart is in my throat by this point. I don't dare open the bathroom door. The whistling sounds like it's in the house now, and I can hear the sounds of the creaking of what sounds like cabinets being opened and shut for what feels like several minutes. I dress quickly, leave the towel on the counter, and turn my flashlight on before I open the door and creep back towards where I had left the rest of my things in the kitchen. When I open the door, every single cabinet, door, and drawer is open. Nobody was supposed to be up here. Everyone should have been asleep. I gather my things as the whistling begins again outside, and I beeline it back towards the trailer where we're sleeping. When I asked the next morning, nobody had been in the house when I was there. You could have a flashing neon sign in front of your face, and you would have ignored it. For what? Good God Almighty. Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least scary, creepy, spooky, 10 being the most. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. Can we take this story as a lesson to pay attention and use our discernment? Okay. I'll see you at the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
I got an email from a guy named Kaz who says he spent a few months living in China among monks, and he had 3 different experiences there that left him unsettled and completely creeped out. And these stories get creepier and creepier, and I'm going to try to put them all in one video. So the first story deals with liminal spaces, and he says that he's exploring a town called Inzhou, which is a city just south of where he was staying. And normally the city is very busy with cars honking and people bustling all around. And he stopped into Chinese tea shop to get a little snack. He got green tea and he got a bread roll. And when he stepped out, the sky was completely overcast and there was nobody on the streets. Very weird. He had never been to this part of China before and not seen a single soul. So he walks down the street a little bit where he knows there's a shopping plaza and he knows there will be people. But there's not. None of the shops were actually closed up and turned off completely, like they had never been opened. But he said most of the shops there have roll down doors where you can still see inside. But he's looking in, he doesn't see anybody. He comes to a shop with the door still rolled up. So he walks inside, the lights are on, he says hi loudly in Chinese, but nobody's inside. Or just look completely abandoned, like whoever was working inside had just picked up and left. So he got creeped out and he walked outside and decided to walk back up the road to the bus stop to head back to the temple where he was staying. The walk to the bus stop was a short one, but he said during the walk he still didn't see anyone, no cars, nobody honking, nobody talking in the distance. It was just completely silent outside. So he gets back to the bus stop and he's sitting down on the bench and he's waiting for the bus, which should arrive in like 5 or 6 minutes. And as he's sitting there, he sees someone approaching. An old white guy wearing a khaki suit with long wispy hair. He was tall and thin, and he comes up to the bus stop and he sits next to Kaz. Kaz looks at him and says, "Do you speak English?" And the guy says, "I do." And he speaks English perfectly. And Kaz says, "Isn't it weird how the city is so quiet right now? Like, I've never seen it like this." And the guy just looks around like he's pondering for a second. He says, "It is strange, isn't it?" But the way that he said it just seemed a little bit off. Like something about it was just creepy. While they're waiting for the bus, they're sitting there talking, and Kaz asks him why he's there, and the guy tells him he's from Canada, and he's more or less where he wants to be, but he sort of dodges the question as to why he's actually in China. Kaz says he didn't want to be impolite, so he didn't press too much, and he tells him that he's from Portugal, and he's here visiting and studying with some monks. And as he's talking to him, the bus comes rolling down the street, and the man looks at him and says, "You better cut your bus, son." Kaz stands up to gather his things, and the bus pulls up and opens the door, and Kaz steps onto the bus, and he turns around to say goodbye, but the old man's not behind him. Suddenly, the street is filled with people, filled with traffic again. And he said, "I would have noticed had there been other people while we were having this conversation, but it was like a switch was flipped and the world turned back on." Okay, next story, the Fox Ladies. Kaz is in a particularly remote and rural area of China called Taizhou, and he's there exploring some mountains where there are temples at the top. And he's hired a local guide, and he's with some other people from the US and Canada. We're all hiking to see these temples, and they're about halfway up. It's high altitude. Everyone's exhausted and hungry. And so the guide says, "Okay, we're going to stop here and we're going to have some snacks." And Kaz had brought some rice cakes that he had purchased from a local vendor before starting the hike. And so he's sitting against this little half wall. He's enjoying his little snacks when he hears what sounds like some girls giggling. So he looks up, and across the path through these bushes, he sees these two women emerge. And they look maybe like early 20s, and they're wearing traditional Chinese dresses, and they have their hair in he described as Chinese ox horn hairstyles, which he also says is like two little buns. And so they're waving at him and giggling, and he calls to them hello in Chinese, and they call back, come and talk to us. He says in China it's rude to walk and eat. So he stays put and he says, no, you come over here and talk to me. They're still giggling, kind of half in the bushes, and he notices like something about their features seems off. He can't quite put his finger on what, but he's looking at them and he's like, they don't seem completely right. That it was so weird, but I was trying to be polite and I just told them to come talk to me. But they say, no, come on, handsome, come up the mountain. Our house is just up the hill. Have dinner with us. And the guide hears this commotion and comes walking over, and he looks and he sees the girls in the bushes, and then he looks at Kaz and he says, are they bothering you? Kaz says, no, I actually told them to come and sit with me, but they won't come from over in the bushes. They just keep yelling at me from over there. And the guide says, stay right here. And he walks over to the girls. The guide starts yelling at them, but in Chinese and with such volume and with such speed that it prevented Kaz from being able to translate everything that was said. But he said he did pick up on that the main thing was go, get out of here. Put too much of a fight up, and eventually they just leave, and he hears them crashing through the bushes on the other side of the path. And as they pick up their hike, he asks the guide, hey, what was their deal? Why were they wearing those clothes? Because he knew that them wearing those clothes would be the equivalent of someone in America wearing like a Victorian style dress. He says, you know, what was the deal with those girls? And the guy just looks at him and shakes his head and says, those weren't girls. And Kaz is like, what do you mean they weren't girls? Like women then? And the guide says, no, they were hulajing. He explains that they're fox spirits said to take the form of young girls who seek out to marry a husband. Says, don't worry, they're only evil in certain parts of China, and this is not one of those parts. And Kaz is like, well, why were they dressed in those dresses and with their hair up like that? Wouldn't they want to appear more modern if they are fox spirits? And the guy just looks at him as if he's stupid, and he says that's how they hide their ears. And that's when it occurred to Kaz that the reason these two girls looked off was because he never registered that they had human ears. Didn't see ears at all, and that's what was off-putting about their appearance. Says when they reached the temple, he did hear what sounded like foxes screaming or women screaming outside. But on the way down from the hike, he jokingly called out, hey, where are the pretty girls at? And the guide looked at him with a sharp look, indicating not to do that. Story 3 is the weirdest, and this is the one that he wanted me to tell because he said it still haunts him and he still has no explanation, whereas the other stories he can maybe find explanations for. But he says this story took place one morning when he set out early in the morning on a long walk to go visit a nearby temple that he wanted to see. And he was using a Chinese map program that primarily took him on a route that was a raised walkway through mostly rice fields. On occasion, he did pass through a small village, but it was very rare for him to see people or any signs of life on this walk. So he's walking for a little while. He passes through another village where there's very few people, and he comes to the rice field again. And in the distance, he can see a large chain link fence that's blocking the road and stretching as far as he can see in either direction. And there's buildings behind this chain link fence. He can make out that these buildings are old houses, but they look abandoned. There's nobody that he can see. And he decides, after checking his map, there's no other roads leading to the temple where he's going. So he looks around, realizes there's no one to see him, and quickly decides to climb the fence because he's going that way anyway and will pass through soon. So he climbs the fence, and he's about 1,000 feet on the other side when he notices a man pushing a cart full of rice straw. Says this guy looks ancient, like old Chinese farmer type. And so he approaches the man, and he has his phone in his hand, and he's trying to be polite and indicating that he's just passing through. And the man looks at him and says in perfect English, you should go, you're not supposed to be here. Caught Kaz off guard because he says encountering an old Chinese farmer who spoke with perfect English with no accent whatsoever was extremely rare in China, and especially rare in this part of the country. He kind of explains himself, and he's like, I'm sorry, I'm just passing through. And he shows him his phone, and the guy completely ignores his phone. He said, it's not safe here. I told you should leave. Kaz apologizes in both English and Chinese, and he says, I'm sorry, I'm just passing through. I'll be on my way. And he starts to walk past this farmer when the farmer grabs him by the shoulder and looks at him and said, I said it's not safe here. Turn around, climb back over the fence, and go around. As I'm telling you for your safety, it's not me you have to worry about. Kaz says when he said that freaked him out enough to turn around and book it back in the direction of the fence. He climbed back over, and when he looked back, the guy's gone. He looked in both directions. He said there was nowhere for him to go. He would have at least heard the cart rattling around. But anyway, he walks back to the village that he had just passed through, and he ends up bumming a ride to the temple from a guy on a motorbike. And when he gets to the temple, which is only about 40 minutes away, he tells the monks about the situation, and he's like, is there like a construction site or something going on right there? Because I passed through, and it was like a super weird vibe. Head monk looks at him funny, and he says, there's no village there. There's no chain link fence. Nothing is there. Kaz describes what happened to him and the guy that he met who told him to turn around, and what was the guy so afraid of. And the head monk insists that there was nothing there, and he says, you know what, I think you should leave. I'm going to have someone escort you back. The monk that is walking back with him ends up taking him down the path right through the town where Kaz had passed, where he had seen the chain link fence and the old buildings and the old farmer. This time there's no town and no fence and no farmer. And so he looks at the monk and he says, what happened here? Like, I just passed through this place. I took this same road. There's no other roads. And the guy just shakes his head and he says, no, nothing's here. End up getting back to the temple, but the whole experience was still bothering Kaz. And so before the monk leaves, he says, what happened there? I know I passed through something that wasn't there on the way back. So can you at least explain to me? And the guy just shakes his head and he says, Westerners would not understand. I don't know. I thought all of these were pretty good. Let me know your thoughts, theories. He'll be seeing the comments. Kaz is his real name. And if you have a spooky scary story time that you think nobody would believe, send it in. We'd love to hear it.
Let's talk about another haunted doll. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about spooky scary stuff, and I have an email where anyone finds a page can send me their ghost stories. And let me tell you, stories about haunted dolls are my all-time favorite, and I cover them all the time. So let's get into it. This story comes from somebody named Angel, who says that her and her family lived in a haunted house when she was around 6 years old. Now, for context purposes, this house was dirt cheap for rent, which was unusual because this was a really nice neighborhood. It's also important to note that everybody in the house would go to bed at around 9 p.m. every night, but her dad in particular worked night shift, which meant he was getting home and everyone was asleep. That is important to the story. Now, this initial haunting started when Angel was playing in her room around 9 p.m. Her bedroom had a clear view of the backyard, and all of a sudden she looks up while she's playing with her dolls to see a little girl swinging back and forth on her swing set. Now, something was clicking in her head like, that person is not real. Angel tells her mom about it, and her mom says, you're probably just tired and you were just seeing things. A couple days later, Angel's dad gets home, and I guess this feeling had been happening for a long time, like since they had lived there. But Angel's dad would come home after night shift and feel like there was a woman and child sitting on the corner of the couch in a very specific position in the living room, the same spot every single time. And it was such a heavy feeling, like they were absolutely without a doubt sitting there, but there was never anybody physically there. And Angel's dad specifically remembers once seeing these two people. Out of the corner of his eye, he turns and there's still no one there. Obviously, he thought it was just him being exhausted and working night shift, so he just kind of brushed it off and was like, my mind is playing tricks on me. So he just completely brushed it off. Until one day, Angel's mom walked outside to do something, and the neighbor caught her and was like, hey, I didn't know that anybody was living there. She goes, yeah, we've been living here for a couple months. And the neighbor immediately jumps to, do you know what happened in that house? And Angel's family was completely oblivious to anything that had gone on in the house prior to them moving in. So mom says, no, I don't know what you're talking about. The neighbor just looks at her and says, you should probably research it. Angel's mom goes inside, researches it, and discovers that there was this horrific crime involving a mother and child and the father in this home. I'm not going to talk about details because your imagination can probably fill in the blanks on why the mom and the child are still there. But it is important to note that in all of these articles, they specifically said where the mother and daughter had been found deceased. And it was exactly where Angel's dad had been seeing these two apparitions, these two spirits. And that was in the living room where the couch was now. And that is the day that they found out why their rent was so cheap. I love the way the story ends because immediately at the end of this email it says, once my parents had figured that out, we moved out almost immediately. You know what? Good for them for making that decision because I would have probably done the same. Even if it was dirt cheap, I don't think I could live with a bunch of spirits, especially if they were like not physically or traditionally haunting me, but like out of the corner of my eye kind of thing. But anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for my ghost stories. Please tell me if you're a parent that this wouldn't be absolutely horrifying. I've been on this haunted doll story kick, so let's get into it. The story comes from Isabella, who says that she spent every single weekend sleeping over at her great-grandparents' house and was not particularly drawn to any sort of spirits or any room in this house until her uncle passed away. It wasn't until she entered her great-grandma's antique doll room where she started to feel things. And since walking into that room, she started to see her uncle's spirit everywhere. But everyone in her family kind of wrote it off as like a child's imagination. And it eventually got to the point where her family started noticing that Isabella would go into this room and start talking to something or somebody. And eventually her great-grandmother started locking the room and was like, you cannot go in there. And she didn't know why until like years later. But apparently Isabella would pass out in this room, not know that she is completely unconscious, and think that she's fully awake the entire time. But every single time that this happened, she would be talking to her uncle. So eventually grandma was just like, yeah, no, we're not doing this. Fast forward years later, Isabella is now 16 years old and has the opportunity to see the actual Annabelle doll in person. Obviously, feeling spiritually connected to dolls, she took the opportunity to see this doll in real life, took a couple of her friends, and was just absolutely captivated by this thing. And by the end of the visit with this doll, she then goes home and immediately feels drawn to this antique doll room again. Isabella's mom was also around, and her and Isabella both gave each other this weird look. After they picked these dolls up, they're walking out of the room, and from behind them, they can hear the floorboards creaking. Isabella's mom is like, absolutely not, I'm not turning around. But Isabella does. And as she's turning around, she wrote in the email that she saw a full body apparition of her late uncle and her great grandmother picking up a very specific doll. And as Isabella reaches for it, the doll is completely ice cold, and out of fear, she drops it and it hits the floor facing upwards, looking at her. They're both like, absolutely not, leave the room, close the door. And a couple hours later, Isabella's mom calls her to the same room that she's in and says that her great-grandmother had been admitted to the hospital. Before they leave for the hospital, Isabella says, I need to go put the doll back. She goes into that room and the doll is nowhere to be found. I wish I would have gotten that on video because I just heard like the craziest noise in my room. I actually hated that, but whatever. But anyways, the doll isn't there. She goes downstairs and tells her mom, like, hey, the doll is not there anymore. And her mom is like, yeah, right. I didn't mess with it. You're messing with me. And this is where things get weird. Before they leave, great grandma says that she wants her handmade blanket. She feels like she's about to pass away and just wants to be spiritually close to those who loved her. So Isabella goes and gets this blanket, takes it to the hospital, gives it to her grandmother. And her grandmother says, you're so sweet for going back to the house and getting me this blanket after you had gotten me this doll already. Isabella is like, what doll are you talking about? Grandma pulls from the underside of this blanket that she is sleeping in the hospital, and it is the same doll that had fallen in the room initially when she saw her uncle and her great-grandmother touching this very specific doll. And she just straight up says, like, grandma, that was not me. But her grandmother is super convinced that it was, and she unfortunately passed away the next day. They didn't sell their great-grandmother's house, and Isabella says that even today, she still sees occasionally her late uncle and her great-grandmother just hanging out in that room together. The worst part about this whole thing is, like, the doll disappeared again after her grandmother had passed away. They have no idea where that doll or the blanket went. They eventually had some professional ghost hunters come out and make sure that the room was actually haunted and it wasn't just something that they had made up. And sure as hell, the entire room, very much haunted. Very, very, very haunted. So everybody just stopped going in there just from the sheer activity that ramped up after her grandmother had passed away. But anyways, that's gonna do it for me. Stay tuned for more ghost stories.
Storytime of one of the scariest stories of my life from back when I lived in the Appalachian Mountains. So I was about 14 when this story took place, and my parents went out on a date and my brothers were at their friends' houses, so I was alone in the house. I was already really uneasy because I just didn't like being alone, and on top of that, like, I have had like paranormal experiences in that house at this point already. So as I'm home alone, I decided that I wanted to knock out some of my chores, and one of my chores was the dishes. So, you know, I had to go to the kitchen and do the dishes and whatever. When I got there, one of the kitchen cabinets was open, and I thought that was weird, but I was just like, oh, okay, maybe one of my family members left it open. So I closed it, and then I just did the dishes. After I did the dishes, I went to my room, and I was just chilling in there for a while. After a while, I decided to go back to the kitchen to get a snack, and when I got to the kitchen, again, one of the cabinets was open. I thought that was really weird and really creepy, but then I was like, okay, I did dishes. I had to put some dishes away before I did them. So I was like, maybe I left the cabinet open. I go back to my room once again. At some point in the night, I decided that I had to go to the bathroom, but to get to the bathroom, I would have to pass the kitchen. On my way to the bathroom, I could not believe what I saw. Every cabinet in my kitchen was open. For a minute, I just stood there stunned, like unable to believe my eyes. I was really scared, and I just closed all the cabinets and tried calling my parents. They weren't answering, my brothers weren't answering, and so I didn't really know what else to do. So I just decided to go take a shower and try to calm down. I get in the bathroom, and I turn the water on, and then I go across the bathroom. The type of shower that I had one of those really old like shower knobs. It was really old. It was kind of rusty, honestly, and it would squeak really loud whenever you like turned it on or off. That detail is important because you would never hear that sound unless you physically grabbed the knob of the shower and turned it on or off. So I'm turned around, the water's running, and I have my back completely to the shower. And then I hear that sound. I hear the squeak of the shower knob slowly turning, and then the shower shuts off. I was like, did that really just happen to me? I was fucking scared. There was nobody in the bathroom with me. I was completely alone. I barely processed what had just happened. And I don't know how I did this. Like, looking back in hindsight, I really don't know how. But I just took a super fast shower. Like quick as possible. I wanted to get the hell out of there. As I'm taking a shower, I hear footsteps outside the bathroom. Now I'm thinking to myself, oh, thank God, like one of my brothers must be home or something. I get out of the shower and there's no one in the house. At this point, I'm really scared. I'm calling all of my family members. Nobody's answering. I'm freaking out really bad. I even started to think that someone might be in the house. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, but I still had to go to my room to get dressed. On my way to my bedroom, I could see my parents' room down the hall, and their door was cracked open. What I saw in their doorway, honestly, still haunts my nightmares. I saw a tall figure standing in the crack of their door, with its hands on the door frame, smiling at me. Trigger warning for anyone who gets scared easily. I'm about to show you guys a picture of like the closest thing I could find online to what I saw. This is kind of what it looked like. After that, I got dressed as fast as possible and I ran out of the house. I got so terrified that I rode my bike to my best friend's house. And even once my family was home, I did not want to go back there. But I had to, and we continued living there for a few more years. To this day, my family does not believe what I saw, which I don't know how, because we had tons of crazy paranormal experiences in that house. If you guys like that story, comment down below some of your own, and if you want more, let me know.
Let's read a scary story together. If you're new here, I love to share my personal paranormal encounters and other stories. This next story is by somebody who claimed they were followed by a shadow man. My first experience with him was when I was a kid. I would have been very young, probably about 3 years old, but I remember it so vividly because it was one of my core memories as a kid. I got out of my bed to get a drink, and my bedroom was at the end of the hallway, with my parents' room next to my room. As I walked past my parents' room, I could see them asleep in their bed, and my younger brother, who was a baby at that time, in his cot. And standing over my parents' bed was a large shadow man, with horns. He was staring right at me, and smiling. After I got my drink, I went back to bed. It terrified me, but I was a kid, so I probably didn't understand what I was looking at. The second experience came when I was about 12. It started out of nowhere. I was sharing a room with my brother, and it was a small room. Our beds were parallel with each other and pushed into the corners of the room, with about 1.5 meters between us. And at the foot of my bed was the door, and at the foot of my brother's bed was a cupboard. I was woken up in the middle of the night to see it standing at the foot of my brother's bed. A very tall shadow man who would stare at me and slowly move close to me, and then dart back into the corner. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel the stare. Now this happened for months. Usually like this, but sometimes he would shake it up. I vividly remember one night where he took shoes out of our shoe basket and made them float around the room, and then just left them on the floor, so I picked them up the next day. It didn't stop until I changed rooms. I know it wasn't sleep paralysis because I had to get up multiple times and run past him to go to the bathroom. I would pretend I was asleep, but he wasn't having any of it. It was pretty terrifying to roll over and see a massive black mass standing over you, then darting back to the corner. The last time I saw him, it wasn't in person. It was the only vision I ever had of him. It's like he got into my head. I was about 16, and I was sitting on my bed. No, all of this occurred in different locations. And all of a sudden, my vision went blank, and all I saw was him standing outside while I was standing inside. The sky was blood red, and there was grass but nothing else. The only thing separating us was a glass sliding door, which slowly started opening, and I snapped back to reality. I was definitely shook, but that was the last time I saw him.
The house looked normal. Completely and totally normal. An old 2-story with slanted floors and the faint smell of dust. Nothing unusual for houses which had stood empty for a while. Tom bought it cheap after the divorce, telling himself that creaky boards were a small price to pay for peace. His daughter, Lily, loved it. They'd had their fair share of rough patches since the divorce. Tom's ex, Marilyn, had abandoned Lily, leaving a note saying that she wasn't cut out to be a mom, and then she just left. "Daddy, this is home," she'd said as soon as she'd seen it. Something about the way that she'd said it had warmed Tom's heart. Her room was up the narrow staircase, second door on the left. She'd set it up with posters, stuffed animals, and a new bunk bed. Lily did have friends stay every now and then, but most of the time, it was just her in a room, alone. Tom had been worried about Lily. She missed her mum, he knew she did, but he'd hoped that in time she'd forget about her. And as luck would have it, as soon as they'd moved in, he felt like they were both thriving in the new house. Until one morning at breakfast. Tom had woken up in a wonderful mood, showered, dressed, and come downstairs. Lily was already sitting at the table. "Good morning, sunshine," he said as he ruffled her hair. "Dad," she whispered, her voice small. Tom switched on the coffee machine. "Yes, my angel?" "There's someone else living in my room." "What do you mean, sweetheart? Do you mean your toys?" "No, I mean there's someone else in there. I hear them. Last night I was sleeping on the bottom bunk, and I saw the top one bounce and shake like someone was moving around on it. Then I saw a hand curl around the edge, its fingers just pointing at me." Tom felt an icy shiver run through his heart. Kids could be weird, he'd admit to that, but it was so strange for Lily to be saying something like this. She wasn't a creative kind of child, wouldn't have the imagination to come up with seeing things. She was logical, pragmatic. If Lily says that that's what she saw, then this is what she saw. A few nights later, he found her asleep on the couch. She said she'd seen someone standing in the hallway, a shape, a head slowly leaning around her doorframe to look at her, retreating again when she'd blinked. "This house creaks," he told her. "Old houses do that." She nodded, but he caught the tears she was trying to blink back. So, he agreed. One weekend, they'd switch rooms. He even joked about how the bunk bed might be more comfortable than his old mattress. He tried to make her laugh, and she did. A fragile sound, though. That night, they traded places. He lay awake for a while, listening to the settling sounds of the house. It wasn't so bad, he thought. After all, he'd seen nothing unusual. Sometime after midnight, he woke to the sound of breathing above him. "Go to sleep, Lily." But then he remembered. He was in her room now. Lily was across the hall. He froze, every muscle locked. The breathing stopped. Silence stretched, and then something shifted on the top bunk. A slow creak of weight pressing into the wood. He sat up just as a hand, long, impossibly thin, the skin grey like paper, hung down from the edge of the bunk. It twitched once and then withdrew. Tom leapt from the bed, flipping on the light. Empty. Both bunks, totally empty. The hallway, nothing there. Lily's door was closed. Then he told himself it was a dream, stress, exhaustion. But when he turned back toward the bed, he saw handprints, faint dusty smudges along the top railing. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, Lily padded in, rubbing her eyes. "Did you see her too?" she asked. Tom didn't say a word. "The woman," she continued, "the one who sleeps on the top bunk." That night, Tom took the bunk bed apart and carried it to the curb. The next morning, Tom looked out of the window and saw that only the bottom frame remained. The top half had vanished. The street was empty except for a trail of pale footprints leading back toward the house. "Marilyn," he muttered. He should have known that even in death, she tried to come back. Even a bullet in the head hadn't seemed to stop her.
So I have 3 mini creepy story times that I'm going to tell all in one video. I just started a new playlist called Mini Creepy Story Time. It's for those really good stories that aren't quite long enough to make a full story, but still too cool not to share. Mini Creepy Story Time number 1. So this man telling the story says that when he was younger, he was at a theme park, and a guy that looked just like him approached him out of nowhere. He warned him that he was going to lose his money that day and to watch his pockets. So sure enough, later
later that day, he notices his money had fallen out of his pocket, but because he was so paranoid about it, he found it when it was just a few feet away. He was in disbelief, and he said he would not have noticed it if it wouldn't be for what that guy said sticking in his brain all day. Mini creepy story time number 2. The man telling this story says that when he and his sister were young, they were playing in their sandbox in the backyard. Brace yourselves. One day, when they were playing in that sandbox, a hand emerged from underneath the sand, came out, grabbed his sister by the arm, and pulled her down. So naturally, she is screaming and crying, and he grabs her and pulls her back up. They both ran to tell the mother, and she didn't believe them. To this day, they both still talk about it and still cannot believe it. It is so freaking creepy. I mean, how the heck do you even explain something like that? Mini creepy story time number 3. The person telling this story says that their mother had passed away several months prior. Randomly, they woke up at 3 a.m. They could hear the sound of the television blasting from in the living room. They approach the room, and sure enough, the TV is blasting. The lights are all on, and they can see their mother sitting in her rocking chair, knitting as she always used to do. So they turn to look at the clock, and now it says 3:44 a.m. And when they look back at their mother, she's gone. All the lights are off, and so is the TV. Total silence and darkness. And nothing was in the rocking chair except for the Afghan that their mother had knitted them. They said, admittedly, they lost it. How weird is that? Are we talking like jumping into another time quick and then coming back? Or I don't even know what. All right, well, those are 3 mini creepy story times that I'm going to pop in here and there just for fun. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about any one of them. If you have a creepy story of your own, you got to share it. And if you're new here, follow for more creepy story time.
I heard this story about a house that was completely infested with mimics. Now, it all started off with this family who lived in New York. And they had lived in this big home in a rural area. They, really, for the longest time, didn't have anything weird ever happen. Until one night, the wife and husband are, in the living room, and their kids are gone with a family friend. Well, the husband says, I'm going to, leave, and I'll be back. I'm going to go to the store. Do you need anything? And his wife says, no, I'm good. I'll see you when you get back. So her husband goes out the front door, gets in his car, and drives off. Right after he pulls out of the driveway, all of a sudden, she hears a noise upstairs. And when she walks upstairs, she sees her husband come out of the closet and just start walking down the hallway. And she's like, honey, wait, how'd you get upstairs? You came back home? And he's like, yeah, I'm going back to the car. I'll talk to you later. And so he just goes downstairs and goes out the front door. So she calls her husband on the cell phone and was like, why'd you come back to the house? That was kind of weird. What were you doing upstairs? And he goes, what are you talking about? I'm far from home. I've been driving for a little while now. And she's confused, and she thinks he's just playing a prank on her. So fast forward to the wife and their 2 kids are sitting on the couch. And the wife and one of the kids are sitting on the couch. And one of the daughters comes downstairs, and they say, hey, what are you doing? You want to come watch a movie with us? And the daughter doesn't say anything. And they're like, hey, aren't you going to respond? What's wrong? And the daughter still doesn't say anything. She just keeps walking past them. And she goes into another room. So the sister follows and is says their name and is like, what are you doing? Well, all of a sudden, the sister comes back down the stairs again. Because she said, I heard you guys calling my name. And they're like, wait, no, you just walked past us into that room. How'd you get upstairs? And she's like, what are you talking about? I've been upstairs in the bathroom. And once again, they didn't know how, the wife didn't know what to think of this. So finally, the last straw was one night, her husband and her 2 kids, they had left to go do something. And she's up in her bedroom. She hears some rustling sound in her closet. And she's like, what is there something in my closet? She opens the door, and there's her husband, crouched down, holding his knees, sitting in the closet, kind of looking really weird, has this strange look on her face. And she's like, what are you doing in the closet? I thought you were with our daughters. And the man her husband just says, come in the closet with me. And she's like, what? And he's like, come in here, come in the closet. And she instantly like knew that wasn't her husband, and she ran out the door and calls up her husband and is like, get here right now. And shortly after that, they end up moving.
I have a scary story to tell you, sent in by a follower, and she has evidence. My name is Maria, and I'm from Romania. At the time that this happened, I was working the night shift at a courier company sorting parcels. We had a company car that would drop us off at home after work. My house is down a quiet country road, only about 4 minutes from the highway. On the right side of the road, a neighbor keeps several old abandoned cars. Every night, I would be dropped off at exactly 1:20 a.m., and I would walk the rest of the way home by myself. One night, before I even got out of the car, I felt something off, like I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain it, but the feeling was strong, like there was another presence nearby. Before I started walking, I took a quick picture down the road. Then I turned on my phone's flashlight and hurried home as fast as I could. When I got inside, I looked at the photo. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, but when I brightened the image, I saw something that made my heart drop. Near one of the old trucks, there was a figure. A child, short and standing still, wearing a white shirt. He had blonde hair, but the face, the eyes looked completely black, and the mouth was wide open. Since that night, I haven't felt safe walking that road alone. Sometimes I've taken more pictures and I've noticed other strange shapes appearing in them too. I don't know what they are. I often call my parents to stay on the phone with me while I walk home now, even though it only takes 4 minutes, because ever since that night, it feels like I'm not walking alone anymore.
When we think of vampires, we think of New Orleans, but the Appalachian vampire is the original American vampire. Now, what people don't understand is in the 1900s, there were Romanian immigrants who came to the Appalachian Mountains because it reminded them very much of the Carpathian Mountains. And they brought with them this lore of vampirism. Now, this story comes out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. There was a girl named Kira. Now, Kira said that she happened to be downtown one night with her friends, and they were at this nightclub. She said, she was dancing, having a good time, when out of the corner of her eye, she spots this man standing by the bar. And she said he had this beautiful curly brown hair, and he had bright blue eyes, and she said, he was just like almost perfect looking. Well, she said, when she was dancing with her friends and she was talking with them, all she could do was focus on this guy. Eventually, she said something was compelling her to go over and talk to him. So she walks over to this guy and she goes, hi, I'm Kira. How are you? Where are you from? He doesn't say anything. She keeps trying to talk to him, but he's not speaking. So she goes, you don't really talk that much. And this guy then proceeds to grab her hands. And she said when she felt his hands, they were ice cold. And as she looked upon his eyes, she said there was this blank stare. And she said it looked like he was empty inside. And right at that moment, she has this vision of a woman screaming, and this guy is chasing her. Well, all of a sudden, she kind of snaps out of it, and she backs up a little bit and is kind of freaked out now. This guy looks at her and says, what do you think of me? And she says, well, to be honest with you, I think you're a little creepy now. And he goes, I'm sorry. I'm still trying to learn to be human. And she said the next thing she knew, she felt something telling her to go outside. So she started to walk out the front door. She goes down the road and she goes into this back alley. This guy follows her out. She said this guy came up right next to her, and next thing she knows, she's kissing this guy. And she said it was getting very passionate when all of a sudden he starts getting very aggressive. And she said he was grabbing her arms so hard he could feel the nails going into her skin. And she said, at this point she became terrified and started freaking out when she hears her friends say, Kara, are you all right? Is everything okay? What's going on? She turns, she takes off running to her friends. She's all frantic. And she says, this man I met at the bar, he was trying to attack me out in the alley. Her friends just kind of look at her like she's crazy. And she's like, what are you, you don't believe me? There seriously was this guy. And they're like, Kira, you were over by the bar alone. and you were talking to someone who there was no one there. And you walked out of the door alone, and you walked into the alley alone, like there was no one with you. And she's like, no, what are you talking about? Like, he was there, he's real. And her friends are like, look, you've had too much to drink. We're going to take you back home so you can get some sleep. So she said she went home, and she started to think, maybe it was me drinking too much. Like, maybe I just imagined this. Until she goes into the bathroom, and she sees these scratch marks on her arm. Now, this next story takes place in Atlanta, Georgia. There was this man named Marcus. Now, Marcus said that he grew up in sort of a bad part of Atlanta. And he said, he was in a lot of trouble and wasn't on the up and up. Well, he said this particular night, him and his group of friends, they're hanging outside of their house. They're listening to music. And he said it was probably about 11 o'clock. So that's when all of a sudden it just got eerily quiet. And he said the next thing he knows, they see this white guy walking down the block. They said just something seemed like really off with him, but also like this looked like a guy that wouldn't be in that neighborhood. So normally they would go up to him and they'd be like, hey, what are you doing in this part of town? And call him out and stuff. But they said they felt like they were in some sort of trance. And this guy makes it all the way to the driveway. He turns and he walks right up to them. And Marcus said he stopped, right next to him. And his eyes were fixated on this one guy who they called Shorty G. And they said this whole time as he stood there, he just was staring straight at Shorty G. Well, this guy walks over to Shorty G. He taps his face and he says, it's a nice night, isn't it? And he turns and he walks away. Well, after this guy leaves, Marcus and his friends are kind of like fighting amongst each other. Like, why didn't you say something? Why did you let him punk you? Like, what's going on? And this whole time, they said Shorty G is just standing there like something was bothering him, like he was terrified or he'd seen something. And he said, the rest of the night, Shorty G didn't say anything. And then finally he said, what, I'm going to go home. Like, I'm going to leave. I'll catch you later. So he walks back to his house, and the next day they're getting ready to all hang out. Shorty G doesn't show up. So they go to his grandma's house. They knock on the door, and the grandma's like, Shorty G never came home last night. I thought he was with you guys. And they're like, no, he said he was going home. For 3 days, they searched for Shorty G. They couldn't find him anywhere. And he said after about a week, they realized he was probably gone. And he said, at this time, they did not call the police. They handled things on their own because they did not want the police in the area. So he said he never heard from Shorty G again. Now, this next story takes place in West Virginia. There was this girl named Caitlin. Caitlin said that her grandmother came over from Romania. And she said she remembered this family story that when her grandmother was younger, her brother was unalived by someone, and they never were able to figure out who did it. And she said they buried him in a local cemetery. Fast forward many years later, they said, that they wanted to bring this case back up, and they found some new evidence. So when they went to bring up the body, they could not find one. And the grandmother said they never found out what happened to him. Well, fast forward now, her brother's daughter at the time, she now has a daughter. And her daughter was like 9 years old. Well, she's at home one night, and her daughter goes into the kitchen, and she said she sees this man standing next to the kitchen table. And she said he had a brown hat, he had this brown jacket on with some, 70s looking jeans. And she said the guy looked at her and said, don't you recognize me? I'm your grandfather. He turned and then walked out the back door. Well, she runs into her mother's room and she's screaming. And she starts telling her mother, like, hey, someone was in the house. There was this guy and he was in the kitchen. And her mom's like, well, what did he look like? She starts describing him, and instantly she starts crying because she goes, that was my dad. That was your grandfather that you've seen. And her grandmother always said that in her country, they believed that sometimes people would come back from the grave, and they called them vampires. Have you ever heard talking or laughing or weird sounds while you're in the shower? Now, believe it or not, a lot of people have had paranormal experiences while in the shower. And I think it's because you have to understand that is when we are the most vulnerable, right? We're unclothed. We are not really focused on anything. And we sort of can't see anything around us. And I think when you have an encounter in the bathroom, it's usually something negative. Now, this is a story that comes out of Chicago. There was this young girl who lived with her roommate, and she said one day she's at the house, she's taking a shower, and said all of a sudden as she's washing her hair, she sees a hand come around the curtain, and it's like moving. And she thinks this is her roommate who's just like messing around with her. So she starts slapping the hand and is like, "Stop it, get out of here, I'm trying to shower." And when she gets out of the shower and goes to see like what her roommate wanted or what she was doing, she realizes her roommate isn't even home. So she, is like, okay, that was really weird. Like maybe I don't know, was imagining it. About 2 weeks later, she once again is in the shower. And as she's taking a shower, she can see the shape of a man standing behind the shower curtain. And, she's terrified. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do I do in this situation? So she grabs the shower curtains and pulls them over, and there's no one there. Several other times, she would be in the shower and she would hear someone talking, or she would get the feeling that someone was touching her back, and she would look around and there was no one there. So this kept happening, and she, wondered, like, why is this happening to me? Like, why doesn't my roommate ever experience this? Until one day she's going out of her house and she talks to the neighbor. And the neighbor says, there used to be a young guy who lived here, and he dated a girl that looked just like you. And it's crazy. The young guy, he was in the shower, he slipped and fell, hit his head, and passed away.
Want to get creeped out? Have you ever heard of the possession of Anna Ecklund?
So on day 2, Anna starts needing fluids injected into her because she's not eating, she's not drinking, and she's throwing up and defecating. Father Theo has to change his clothing 3 to 4 times every session because of the amount that she's vomiting.
That is that's not cute.
He starts to believe that she's possessed by multiple demons. Plural. It's multiple.
Bad news bears.
Father Theo asks them to reveal themselves. He wants them to do this because, as we know, your name has power. He wants to know their names. He wants to take some of their power away. So after hours of this, one of these demons comes forward and reveals himself as Beelzebub, which I am not gonna repeat. I'm not gonna say it again. Makes me uncomfortable.
So you'll just call him B.
B is considered Satan's right-hand man. That's his
homie.
That's his guy. And he's also known as the Lord of the Flies. When he makes himself known to Father Theo, flies swarm the room.
Oh my God, it's so creepy.
B continuously taunts Father Theo and questions him on his religious knowledge. Father Theo asks B why he's possessed this girl, and B replies that it wasn't his idea. He's possessed her because a curse was placed on Anna by her deceased father, Jacob. Jacob had turned against religion at some point before his passing. He would mock Anna for her religious beliefs. Jacob was also reported to be extremely abusive and an alcoholic by some sources. A curse is one of the things considered by the Catholic Church to be a doorway for possession. Father Theo asks B why Jacob would want to possess Anna, and B says, ask Jacob yourself. Before Father Theo can reply, a second demon comes forward.
I have a creepy photo that I want to show you guys, but first, a quick little backstory. The photo that I'm about to show you guys was taken about 15 years ago. The person who took the photo had just purchased one of those digital cameras that they had set on the table with a timer to go off every 10 seconds. After he was done testing the camera, he went back to delete all of the photos that he took when he saw it. You can clearly make out that this is a figure of some type of very dark entity. The person who took the photo was so freaked out that he did not step foot in his garage for years. I truly believe that this is someone that may have unalived themselves in the garage. For whatever reason, the garage is a very popular area for that. A lot of times they do stick around and are unable to cross over. A lot of times when a person unalives themselves, they stay with that trapped emotion, like it stays within them even after death. Unfortunately, unless someone does some type of prayer or cleansing in order to help them see the light, that's the only way that they're going to be able to cross over. But what do you guys think?
Hey guys, it's time for another spooky story. I am Autumn in Appalachia. Send me your spooky stories, add me on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube, same handle. Without further ado, not me getting swarmed by moths out here. This story comes from Lainey. She will be tagged in this video. We're going to be sharing a Ouija board story that she told me. In addition to her story, we're going to be sharing one of my mom's stories. It's one she told me growing up, and it's about a Ouija board session that she had when she was a teenager. It scared the shit out of me when she'd tell me growing up, and to this day in my 30s, I've never touched a Ouija board. You couldn't pay me enough to. Now back to Lainey. Lainey said she grew up in a very religious family. Even though she grew up that way, she was very skeptical on all things spiritual like God and demons until this experience. This, she said, made her a believer. Lainey said that one day she is just curious enough to try a Ouija board session. Now, she already had a Ouija board, but she said it wasn't a legitimate one, so she was skeptical on whether or not it would work. She decided instead to DIY her own Ouija board. She, her sister's boyfriend get a piece of paper. Her sister draws the board up. They sit in the middle of the room with the Ouija board in the center, and they light a candle and set it away from them so that their movement does not disturb the flame. They begin the session. Now, the second that they begin the session, they ask if anything is in the room with them. Without hesitation, the planchette moves and spells out Z-O-Z-O. I'm not going to say the name. I've heard that even saying the name of this demon invites bad juju. I am not trying to furk around and find out. Now, this immediately makes their stomach sink. In order to debunk whether this is actually happening, they again ask, is anything in the room with us? The planchette moves to yes. They ask, who is it? And again, without hesitation, it spells out Z-O-Z-O. Now, at this point, she said that the candle flame is going crazy. The second that it spelled out the name, this candle is just flickering all over the place. They are so terrified, they decide they're going to end the session. So they say goodbye. Afterward, they try to smudge the room, they sage themselves, and they burn the board. Now, I've heard mixed reviews on whether or not you should burn a board. You guys let me know in the comments. Regardless, they did to try to get rid of it. And ever since Lainey said that she is just really paranoid that she has invited some sort of malevolent being into her home or a negative energy, she said there is one single thing that's happened since the session. So she had a nightmare. In this nightmare, Lainey was in her old house. She's doing a Ouija board session. She said that, again, the planchette spells out Z-O-Z-O, and when it does, all the candles blow out, the lights are flickering on and off, and the house just starts violently rattling and shaking, and it scared her so bad in the dream, she bolted awake. Other than that, like I said, nothing's happened. She just has this nagging feeling that something is not right. Now for y'all's 2-for-1 special. So my mom always shared this story growing up, and it scared me. I believe it's real. So my great-grandma, Ouija boards were marketed towards kids when they first came out. And my great-grandma always liked spooky stuff. And she thought it was funny. She thought it was like a game. A lot of people did or do. And so she kept Ouija boards in the house. And one day, my mom, my aunt, and their cousin, as kids, decide they're going to pull out my great-grandma's Ouija board and try to do some sort of a session in the upstairs bedroom. So they set the whole thing up, the whole nine, got the candles, the lights are off, and the door in the room is closed. This is important. There's no AC, there's no open windows, anything like that. They start this session, and nothing of note really seems to be happening until all of a sudden this wind comes from nowhere and blows through the room. They physically, like it was a tangible thing, like blew their hair, made the curtains move, all the candles blow out. They all screamed, and they don't even end the session or anything. They just run out of the room because it was just not explainable. Like I said, there is no AC vents, there's no open windows. It was not logical. Afterward, there was something wrong with that house. My mom said that it was just that feeling where, in particular, if you were like walking down the hallway toward that room, it felt like something was like breathing over your neck or like, hovering over you, like something was always watching you. She said that even when she would like go into that room and she would have to like go get in the bed, she was too scared, which kind of makes me giggle because it is like a classic kid thing. She was too scared to like walk up to the edge of the bed. She would run and like jump onto the bed so her feet, weren't like close to the underside of the bed. Overall, the creep factor was just very much so amplified in that little white house after that. Even into adulthood, you know, my mom felt the same way. You guys let me know what you think in the comments. Are Ouija boards just a game? Are they fake? Is there something to it? Would you or have you ever messed with a Ouija board? I, for one, like I said, will not be firking around and finding out. Y'all stay tuned for some more spooky stories. Send me your spooky stories, and I'll catch you in the next one.
The hotel front desk called my room asking why I kept leaving, but I hadn't left once. So I was staying in a hotel for just one night by myself, and I got in around 7 p.m. and I took all my stuff up to my room and I didn't leave. I ordered food, I showered, I pretty much just laid on my bed and scrolled through my phone. Sometime after 10:30, the phone rang, and I almost ignored it, but I figured it had to have been the front desk, so I answered. It was a man on the other end, and he just said, "Hi, this is the front desk. We've noticed a lot of activity in and out of your bedroom door a lot. If you could, just keep your door closed." I was confused, and I told him he probably had the wrong person because I hadn't left my room since I got here. There was a short pause, and then he said, "No, it's definitely this room. We've seen the door open a couple of times." At that point, I sat up because I knew that this was wrong, and I looked over at my door and my shoes were still right next to the door, my bag was unpacked, and I hadn't even touched my key card since I got into my room. It was still on my TV desk. So again, I told him, "No, I haven't left my room," and he said, "Okay, maybe I just need to check something on our end real quick." He hung up, and I sat there a little unsettled for a minute, but then I was like, okay, well, they'll just figure it out. I don't need to worry about this anymore. Not even a minute later, my door handle from the outside moved. It was just a slight shift, like somebody was testing it, not trying to fully open it. I froze and I just stared at the door. I noticed that my deadbolt was still intact, and I just kind of sat there frozen, and I didn't hear any voices. I didn't hear anybody else trying to test it or anything after that. And then about 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from an unknown number, and it said, "You left again." I wound up putting the latch on my door, and I honestly stayed awake most of that night. I was so creeped out. In the morning, I did an early checkout, and I went downstairs and I talked to the front desk about it. They looked at me really confused, and they said, "We don't call rooms due to door activity," and that nobody had reported anything for mine. I left pretty quickly after that, and I will not be staying there again.
So this was an interesting comment I had back to one of my videos I did on Ouija boards, so I'd love to hear some more of your opinions and stories. But this chap's wrote that he did a Ouija board at school in the early 80s and everything it spelt out was in German, which we didn't understand. So gave what we wrote down to the German teacher, whose face dropped and wouldn't say what was written. Now that's utterly chilling, because why wouldn't the teacher want to tell her students what those words meant in English? You'd think they were quite keen to let you know, wouldn't you? So that's really eerie, and it's got my attention sparked. I'm dying to know what was written. But it's just, you know, got me on the subject of an experience I've had with a Ouija board, and I've done them countless times now, and I've been completely honest, you know, 80% of the time they haven't either moved at all, or somebody in the group has clearly been moving it, and you always know when that's happening. So sometimes you can get a bit on the skeptical side, but one pretty impressive one I did have was in my old house. We started playing the Ouija board one night, and I, you know, had the candle going, and it was quite atmospheric. It was in the winter, I always remember, it was freezing cold, and the three of us began communicating with something, and everyone was adamant they weren't pushing it, and I certainly wasn't. And it gave the name of a chap. He was called John. It also gave a surname, which I can't recall now. It said he'd passed away on the train. Sure enough, we did live by a train station. It gave the year of death as 1953, and some other factors as well. I'm pretty sure it said heart when we were asking how did you pass away. Now, I wasn't quite satisfied with this, and I wanted a little bit more. So I said, if you really are here and, you know, you're giving us these messages, make yourself known. And the dining room in which we were playing the Ouija board was directly below the spare bedroom in the house. And sure enough, on cue when I asked that, a book, because I found it was a book later on, fell in the spare room and banged right on the floor as soon as I asked for that. Of course, you know, it scared the life out of all of us, and all three said that there was a strong electric atmosphere in the air that was thoroughly unpleasant. It wasn't nice at all. So with that, you know, we subsequently stopped playing the Ouija board, and I flew upstairs to see what had gone on. and there was a book on the floor, in the middle of the floor, folks, and that's absolutely true. So, you know, they're quite hit and miss, really. A lot of the time, absolutely nothing happens, but maybe every now and then something does come through. Who knows? Let me know your opinions.
What if I told you that we have prehistoric archaeological finds from animals that went extinct over 11,000 years ago? So we are back with another Trini Paranormal, Trini folklore, but this is a Trini fact. Is it a folklore? It's a fact. And this archaeological find, was something that was discovered in the Pitch Lake. The Pitch Lake. Yes, in the Pitch Lake, when they were excavating it, what they found was the rib and the thigh bone of what is believed to be a giant sloth that went extinct 11,000 years ago. So this is what it looks like. So this giant sloth, it was over 20 feet tall. It was believed to be over 20 feet tall, and it weighed several tons. This was found in the Pitch Lake. Another thing that was found on the Pitch Lake was the tooth of a mastodon. So the mastodon is basically like a cousin to the woolly mammoth and the elephants. So it kind of looks like an elephant, and this is what it looks like. And its remains, or parts of its remains, its teeth, was found in the Pitch Lake as well. And it's very cool because it shows that Trinidad and Tobago was inhabited by prehistoric creatures hundreds of thousands of years ago. And a very interesting fact, according to the Lake Asphalt website, is that in 1928, a tree that was believed to be 4,000 years old arose from the middle of the Pitch Lake, and then it started to sink back down. And they took a piece of it to preserve. So let me know, did you all know that the Pitch Lake had such a rich history? Prehistoric history one, and native folklore on the other side. Let me know if you knew about these cool stories about the Pitch Lake.
Might have known the story of real life boogeyman.
On the evening of March 5th, 1958, a 22-year-old man named Qasim bin Osman was eating dinner inside of his home in a small town in modern-day Malaysia when he suddenly heard somebody frantically pounding at his front door. Qasim was not expecting any guests, but he also wasn't really surprised by the noise, because Qasim was something called a bomo, which was basically like a shaman. He was very well known and highly respected in town, and so it was not unusual for people to show up at his house sort of unexpectedly, asking for help with various spiritual problems. So Qasim got up and he went to answer the door. And when he did, he saw 4 men standing on his porch, and he vaguely recognized them like he'd seen them around town before. One of the men introduced himself as Kor Agwan, and Kor said he needed Qasim's help because last night his wife had gone missing. He'd spent all day searching and still couldn't find her, and so he hoped that maybe Qasim could help. And when he heard this, Qasim felt a little bit uncomfortable. Generally speaking, he was very confident in his abilities as a healer, which was primarily what he did. He was like a spiritual healer. But he'd never helped find a missing person before. So Qasim was honest and told Kor that he really didn't know if he could help, but he would try. And so Qasim invited all 4 men into his home, into his living room, and then while they were sitting down, he went into his supply room and he grabbed some matches and this large bowl that was filled with charcoal. And then with these supplies, he went back and met the group. Qasim then instructed everybody to sit in a circle on the floor. He explained that he was going to do a meditation ritual that was meant to help him clear his mind so he could tap into the energies around him. Ideally, he said, he would be able, through this process, to connect to Kor's wife's energy so he could maybe find her. And so the group, after sitting down and sort of understanding the instructions, Qasim, he struck a match and then lit the charcoal on fire that was in this bowl. Then Qasim actually leaned his head over this, smoldering bowl of charcoal and began taking in these huge breaths of smoke. And he kept inhaling the smoke until he felt so lightheaded that he was about to pass out. And right as he's on the verge of losing consciousness, an image flashed through his mind. For a split second, what he saw was this light green field that seemed to extend, into infinity, just a massive green field. And so at this point, Qasim, he snapped his head back, stopped breathing in all the smoke, and he told Kor and the other men that he knew where they needed to go. About 15 minutes later, Kasim, Kor, and the other men walked into a light green field that was identical to the one Kasim had seen in his mind. It was a huge rice paddy right on the edge of town. And so when they got to this rice paddy, they split up and just began looking for, I guess, clues or maybe for Kor's wife. They didn't even know. And very quickly, one of the men yells out that he's found something. And so Kasim and Kor and the others, they join this guy and they look down and they see there's like this pile of straw that's covering something pretty sizable in the rice paddy. Eventually, one of the men reached down and began removing the straw, and at the base of it, underneath this big pile, was Kor's wife, and she was covered in blood, and she was dead. About 30 minutes later, a police officer named J.C. Sabui sat inside of an interview room at the police station with Kor, the dead woman's husband. By this point, Sabui had been briefed on the details of this case. He knew that Kor's wife had gone missing about 24 hours earlier, that the town Bomo had apparently had this vision that led them to the rice paddy where her body was found, and that officers had actually already determined that she'd been beaten to death. Now, Sabui was trying to hone in on potential suspects, and the victim's husband was the most obvious place to start. So Sabui asked Kor to tell him more about the circumstances around his wife's disappearance. Kor explained that the night before she had left on her own to go for a late night walk and never came home. He said he didn't know of anybody who would have wanted to hurt her, but he did have a theory about her murder. He said his wife normally wore a lot of jewelry, but when he'd seen her body in the rice paddy, he'd noticed all of her jewelry was gone. So he wondered if maybe she'd been robbed. Sabui thought the idea that this woman just went on a random nighttime walk by herself right before she went missing and turned up dead, it just seemed sort of unlikely. And it also seemed like Kor was just really eager to throw suspicion off of himself. But the robbery angle also did sound plausible. I mean, turning up with no jewelry on when she normally wore jewelry suggests a robbery. So Sabui decided to follow up both on the husband and the robbery angle. And he and his team would spend the next 4 days searching for evidence against Kor and for this missing jewelry. But they came up totally empty. And so 96 hours into this investigation, they basically had nothing to show for it. And so as a result, he sort of felt desperate. And even though he didn't normally believe in the town Bomo's visions or magic, he felt like, it was one of his visions that led to this body. Maybe he actually is as good as he says he is. Why don't we ask him what he thinks? On the morning of March 9th, so this is 4 days after Kor's wife's body was found, Sabui knocked on the town Bomo's front door. And when Kasim answered, Sabui explained the situation about how, there was missing jewelry and maybe it was a robbery and they didn't know what. And they asked if Kasim would be willing to help, since, after all, he had already found the body. Now, Kasim was not particularly eager to be a part of this investigation. He openly said, I don't solve crimes. I'm a spiritual healer. But, he had to admit that he's already gotten involved. He's the one whose vision led to the finding of the body, and so he told Sabui that, of course, he would try. So Sabui watched as Kasim left the door and went into his house and then came back with a bowl of charcoal. And before long, Kasim had lit it on fire and was deeply inhaling the fumes coming off of it. And after a minute or two, when Kasim was totally messed up from breathing in all this smoke, he looked up and he said he's had another vision. And so he jumped up, he left his house and began walking down the street. And Sabui just followed right behind him. And Sabui watched as Kasim would stop in front of each house, and for a few moments he would just stare at the house. And then eventually he would just move on to the next one. Kasim looped all around town, just stopping and staring at all these houses for literally hours. And to Sabui, he was starting to feel like it was a mistake to bring Kasim in, because it just seemed like this isn't going anywhere. His ability to find the body happened pretty much right away. What is this? What is he doing? However, out of nowhere, Kasim stopped in front of yet another house, stared at it for a second, and then turned and told Sabui, this is where the jewelry is. And this actually made Sabui feel very intrigued. Because of all the houses that he thought Kasim might eventually stop in front of and suggest there was some clue inside, let alone the jewelry inside, this particular house had never entered Sabui's mind. So given the weirdness of where they now were standing, Sabui called for backup. And then he and a team of officers searched this house. And lo and behold, they found Kaur's wife's missing jewelry inside, just like Kasim had said. And so despite Sibui's, growing skepticism around what Kasim can actually do, this was now the second time that Kasim had sort of had this big breakthrough in the case from his visions. Like, that was incredible. But the problem was the house that Kasim had led them to, where the jewelry was Kasim's own house. It would turn out Kaur's wife really did go on a walk by herself on the night she disappeared. But during that walk, she passed by Kasim's house. And when she did, Kasim attacked and killed her and then stole her jewelry and hid her body in the rice paddy. Apparently, he thought pretending to help with the investigation would make him look innocent. But the police quickly realized he wasn't magical, he was just guilty. After his arrest, Kasim would give a full confession, and he was ultimately convicted of murder and sentenced to death.
He sat inside that prison cell and looked the system dead in the eyes and said, "I will kill people. I will eat their hearts. Do not let me out." And Nebraska said, "Oh, okay, well, let's release you anyways." 10 years early. And just days after walking out of those doors, this man went on a killing spree that left 4 people dead. This is the story of Nico Jenkins. Ever since Nico was a kid, violence and abuse has always surrounded him. He was getting on his hands and knees on a bathroom floor, cleaning up somebody else's blood before he probably even went to school. By 7 years old, he was already bringing weapons to school. By 11, he had joined a gang. And at 17 years old, he was sitting in a courtroom being sentenced to 15 years in prison for carjacking. And you would think he'd realize his wrong ways and be like, okay, I seriously need to better myself. But no, instead, Nico went into prison and kept going. He was always assaulting inmates, assaulting guards, participating in prison riots, getting written up 71 times between 2004 and 2012 alone for violations including creating a shiv out of a toilet brush, racking up so many additional charges that 5 more years got added onto his sentence, bringing it up to 20 years. And then things behind those walls stopped being just violent and started becoming something much darker. Because Nico started hallucinating, started drinking his own bodily fluids, started unraveling in ways that even hardened correctional officers were alarmed by. And the prison had no choice but to keep him in solitary confinement for roughly 60% of his entire sentence. Not as punishment, but because they genuinely could not figure out how to keep the other inmates safe around him. As early as May 2009, prison records showed Nico telling staff that an ancient Egyptian god named Apophis, the serpent deity of chaos and destruction, was speaking to him directly and commanding him to kill children. That if they ever released him back into the real world, people were going to die. That he would eat the hearts of his victims. That the violence inside of him has found a name and a purpose, and that there was no version of his release that ended without bloodshed. So naturally, the state of Nebraska was like, okay, I hear you. I definitely hear you. So let's just take you out 10 years early. Yeah? Just 10 days after being released, Nico caught up his sister and his cousin, and together they lured out 2 men named Jorge Ruiz and Juan Uribe Peña away from a bar by setting up what looked like a robbery. And when those 2 men realized what was happening and tried to run, tried to do any rational thing a person could do when they feel like their life is about to slip away, Nico raised his weapon and shot both of them dead in the street, leaving them there and walking away without a trace of hesitation. 8 days after that, him and his sister hunted down a man named Curtis, and they ambushed him and killed him. Which, remember what I said, the whole family is insane. His own mother has been the one supplying him with the ammunition to commit these crimes. And then just 2 days later, Nico decided that he wanted a car. So him and his uncle drove over to a McDonald's and spotted Andrea Kruger, a mother of 3 children, sitting in her car doing something so painfully ordinary, just trying to grab a meal and go home. And Nico walked up to her, grabbed her body, dragging her out of her own seat, and he shot her in the head at point blank range right there in the parking lot. Then he drove away in her car like she had never existed at all. After just 29 days of being free, he has already taken the lives of 4 people. When police finally caught up to him, Nico's story just kept on changing. First, he told him that his sister and his cousin were the one who did everything, that he had nothing to do with it. And then he sat down for an 8-hour recorded confession where he walked investigators through every single murder with this calm demeanor that was deeply unsettling, just owning all of it in this vivid detail. And then he changed his story again, landing finally on the version that he would carry into court, which was that none of these were murders at all. That every single one of those deaths was a sacred ritual sacrifice carried out under the divine command of Apophis, the Egyptian god of chaos, and that he was simply a vessel fulfilling a holy obligation. During his own trial, which he chose to represent himself in, Nico spoke in tongues, howling and laughing as the prosecutors were reading the details of his victims' deaths out loud in court. But then he did something that somehow managed to be even more audacious than all of that. He sued the state of Nebraska for $24.5 million, arguing that they had manufactured this entire catastrophe by releasing him after he had explicitly, repeatedly, and on record told them exactly what would have happened the moment that he got out. And I'll be honest, his logic was not completely wrong, because this is the man that they consider to be too dangerous to be around other convicted criminals. And somehow they thought releasing him around regular civilians with zero oversight was the reasonable next step. I mean, even the victims' families agreed. The families of Andrea Kruger and Curtis Bradford also sued the state of Nebraska for the same reason, arguing that the prison officials had every single tool they needed to prevent those deaths, and they still chose to not use a single one of them. Nico Jenkins was sentenced to death 4 times over, plus 450 years in prison on weapon charges. His sister Erica got life in prison and still somehow found time awaiting sentencing to attack their cousin in a jail cell with a bike lock stuffed inside of a saw. Their mother Lori got 10 years in federal prison for buying the ammunition used in the killings, and their uncle Warren got 40 years for his role in Andrea Kruger's murder. So that means that the whole family is behind bars. Thank God. And as of right now, in 2026, Nico Jenkins is still alive on death row in Nebraska, still breathing, still existing, still on the same planet as all of us, which is extremely disturbing to think about. But please be safe out there and be kind to each other. I love you guys so much. I will see you in my next video. Mwah. Group hug.
I remember when my husband would call me outside to watch the sunset with him. It wasn't much for me, but I could tell it meant a lot to him. We would just sit down on the porch, have some tea, watch the dogs run around the yard. You know, it was nice. Lately, the sun hasn't been coming up. Some sort of problem with the orbit or Earth's axis or something. I don't know. An extinction level cosmic event, they had called it. And I don't know. The way that I saw it, I didn't have too much to worry about. An Aztec on TV said that what's happening is impossible, so there must be some kind of outside intervention. Far be it for me to understand a lick of this college boy's gibberish. I've lived my life, come what may. So my husband and I decided to sit out on the porch. I mean, there ain't no sun, but we can still enjoy the outdoors, right? So I sat next to him on the bench and covered us up with a nice homemade quilt. It wasn't long before he was out like a light. So I figured I'd rest my eyes a little bit too, seeing as I was already here. But it got cold real quick. Like, I woke up shivering, could barely move my fingers. I looked over at my husband and he wasn't moving. But when I looked off into the sky, I could see it. The sun looked a heck of a lot smaller though than it used to, and it wasn't too bright either. And I could hear some chatter from the TV in the other room. Earth has fallen out of orbit with the sun. Temperatures are rapidly dropping all over Earth. Casualties are. I just turned that racket off. I just wiped the frost from my hair and rested my head on my husband one last time. And I whispered to him, the sun came up. Guess we missed it.